The bank vault door slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed through the marble corridors of First National Bank in downtown Phoenix. Inside, 12 terrified hostages huddled against the cold steel walls while 3 armed men in ski masks paced nervously, their weapons gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Outside, Detective Sarah Mitchell was pulling into the parking lot when her radio crackled to life with the words, "Every cop dreads. We have a hostage situation." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But what happened next would make headlines across the country and leave even seasoned law enforcement officers shaking their heads in disbelief. Because when the bank robbers made their demands, they had no idea they were dealing with someone who didn't play by anyone's rules, not even her own department's. Sarah Mitchell had been having the worst week of her career. 3 cases had gone cold, her captain was breathing down her neck about overtime costs, and her partner had called in sick for the 4th day straight, leaving her to handle patrol duties alone. The last thing she needed was a bank robbery on a Friday afternoon when she was already running on her 3rd cup of coffee and 2 hours of sleep. She stepped out of her patrol car and immediately assessed the scene. 2 squad cars had already arrived, their red and blue lights painting the glass facade of the bank in alternating colors. Officer Marcus Chen was crouched behind his vehicle speaking rapidly into his radio, while his partner, Officer Lisa Rodriguez, was directing civilians away from the building. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, jogging over to Chen's position. 3 suspects, all armed, entered the bank approximately 8 minutes ago, Chen reported, not taking his eyes off the building. They herded everyone into the main vault area. We count at least 12 hostages, including 2 children and an elderly man who appears to have a medical condition. Sarah pulled out her binoculars and scanned the building's windows. The bank was a modern structure with floor-to-ceiling glass panels, but the vault area was located in the center of the building, completely sealed off from outside view. Any communication attempts? Negative. They haven't made contact yet. SWAT's en route, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Sarah knew from experience that 15 minutes in a hostage situation could feel like 15 hours. She studied the building's layout, mentally mapping the entrance points, emergency exits, and sightlines. First National Bank was designed like a fortress. Security cameras at every angle, reinforced glass, and only 2 ways in or out of the main floor. "Detective Mitchell?" A voice called from behind her. She turned to see Captain Reynolds approaching, his face grim. "I need you to take point on this until SWAT arrives. Chen and Rodriguez will maintain the perimeter." Sarah nodded, already formulating a plan. She'd handled hostage situations before, but something about this one felt different. The robbers had been inside for 8 minutes without making any demands. That was unusual. Most bank robbers wanted a quick grab-and-go, not a prolonged standoff. Her radio crackled. "All units, we have movement inside the building." Through her binoculars, Sarah could see shadows moving behind the frosted glass of the bank's main lobby. Then, suddenly, the front door opened, and a man in a black ski mask emerged, assault rifle in hand. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket. He moved with military precision, scanning the area before stepping fully outside. "This is it," Sarah muttered, grabbing the bullhorn from Chen's patrol car. But before she could speak, the man raised his own megaphone. "Listen up, cops," his voice boomed across the parking lot. "We've got 12 people in here, including kids. You want them to see their families again, here's what's going to happen." Sarah waited, finger poised over the bullhorn's trigger. "We want $2 million in unmarked bills, a helicopter fueled and ready, and safe passage to the airport. You've got 1 hour, starting now, or these people start dying one by one." The man started to continue his demands, but Sarah had heard enough. While he was still speaking, she dropped the bullhorn and sprinted toward the bank's side entrance, a service door she'd noticed during her initial assessment. The lock was electronic, but Sarah had learned a few tricks during her 15 years on the force. "Mitchell, what are you doing?" Captain Reynolds shouted into his radio, but Sarah had already switched hers off. She reached the service door and quickly examined the lock mechanism. It was a standard commercial-grade electronic lock, the kind that maintenance crews used. Sarah pulled out her multi-tool and began working on the access panel. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, bypassing the security circuit in under 30 seconds. The door clicked open. Sarah slipped inside the building, finding herself in a narrow maintenance corridor that ran along the bank's eastern wall. The air was thick with the smell of fresh paint and cleaning supplies. She could hear voices coming from the main lobby. The robbers were still arguing about their demands, apparently unaware that their time frame had just been dramatically shortened. Moving silently down the corridor, Sarah reached a junction that led toward the vault area. The bank's floor plan was burned into her memory from a security consultation she'd done 2 years earlier. The vault was accessible through the main lobby, but there was also a maintenance access point that led directly to the climate control room adjacent to the vault. She found the access hatch and carefully opened it. The space beyond was cramped, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, but it would get her exactly where she needed to be. Sarah squeezed through the opening and found herself in a small mechanical room filled with humming HVAC equipment. Through the thin wall, she could hear voices. Not the robbers, but the hostages. A woman was trying to calm a crying child, while an older man's labored breathing suggested he was having difficulty with the stress of the situation. Sarah pressed her ear to the wall and listened carefully. The vault had 2 entrances, the main door that the robbers had sealed, and an emergency exit that was probably locked from the outside. But the emergency exit was designed to be opened from the inside in case of fire or other emergencies. She pulled out her phone and quickly sent a text message to a number she'd memorized years ago. The bank's security chief, Tom Bradley, who she'd worked with on several cases. "Emergency override code for vault exit," she typed. The response came back within seconds. 7739 hash. Are you inside? Sarah didn't reply. Instead, she found the ventilation grate that separated the mechanical room from the vault area. The screws were standard Phillips head, and her multi-tool made quick work of them. She could hear the robbers in the main lobby, their voices growing more agitated as they realized the police weren't responding to their demands as expected. Through the grate, she could see the hostages. 12 people, just as reported, a mix of bank customers and employees, ranging in age from about 7 to 70. They were sitting against the far wall, hands visible, eyes wide with fear. 2 of the robbers were pacing back and forth, weapons ready, while the third, the one who'd made the demands, was presumably still outside or in the lobby. Sarah carefully removed the grate and slipped into the vault. The hostages saw her immediately, and she quickly raised a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. An elderly woman nodded understanding and whispered something to the others. Moving quickly but quietly, Sarah made her way to the emergency exit. The keypad glowed softly in the dim light. She entered the code Bradley had given her, 7739 hash. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Sarah turned to the hostages and gestured toward the exit. "Go," she whispered. "Quietly. Stay low." They moved like a well-rehearsed evacuation drill. The elderly man needed assistance, and 2 younger hostages helped him while the mother guided her children toward the exit. Within 60 seconds, all 12 hostages were filing through the emergency exit into an alley behind the bank. Sarah was the last to leave, but as she reached the doorway, she heard footsteps in the main lobby. The robbers had realized something was wrong. "Where the hell is everybody?" one of them shouted. Sarah stepped through the exit and pulled the door closed behind her, but she didn't run. Instead, she walked calmly around to the front of the building, where Captain Reynolds and the other officers were still maintaining their positions, completely unaware that the hostage situation had just resolved itself. The robber with the megaphone was still standing outside the front entrance, but his confident demeanor was starting to crack as he realized his partners inside had gone silent. Sarah picked up the bullhorn she'd dropped earlier and clicked it on. "Gentlemen," her voice echoed across the parking lot, "I'm afraid your hostages have left the building." The robber with the megaphone froze. His weapon lowered slightly as he processed what Sarah had just announced. Behind him, his 2 partners came rushing out of the bank, their faces twisted with confusion and rage beneath their ski masks. "What do you mean they left?" the leader shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "They were locked in the vault." Sarah stood calmly behind the police barricade, bullhorn in hand, watching as the 3 men began to panic. The shorter one, who had been guarding the lobby, kept looking back at the empty bank as if the hostages might somehow reappear. The third robber, built like a linebacker, was scanning the surrounding buildings with his rifle, searching for snipers that weren't there. "Check your six, gentlemen," Sarah said into the bullhorn, her voice steady and professional. "Your hostages are currently being interviewed by my colleagues in a safe location about 3 blocks from here. They're drinking coffee and giving statements about your faces, your voices, and that distinctive tattoo on your leader's left hand." The leader instinctively glanced down at his hand, then quickly hid it behind his back. Sarah smiled grimly. She'd been bluffing about the tattoo, but his reaction told her everything she needed to know about his criminal experience, or lack thereof. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Captain Reynolds appeared at her elbow, his face a mixture of admiration and fury. "Mitchell, what the hell did you just do?" "My job," she replied, not taking her eyes off the 3 increasingly desperate men in front of the bank. "Your job was to wait for SWAT and follow protocol. You just single-handedly violated about 15 different departmental procedures and probably put yourself in violation of—" "Sir," Officer Chen interrupted, jogging over from his patrol car. "All hostages are accounted for and safe. No injuries. They're asking for Detective Mitchell by name." The captain's expression shifted. "All of them?" "Yes, sir. 12 civilians, including 2 children aged 7 and 9, plus bank employees. They said Detective Mitchell got them out through some kind of emergency exit while the suspects were distracted." Sarah watched as the leader of the robbery crew tried to regain control of the situation. He raised his megaphone again, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "Okay, cops, you think you're smart? We still control this building. We've got security cameras, alarm systems, and enough firepower to turn this place into a war zone." "Actually," Sarah replied through her bullhorn, "you've got a 2018 Ford Explorer parked in Space 14 of the municipal lot behind the building, license plate number JKR 7745, registered to Vincent Murphy of 1247 Oakdale Street, Apartment 3B. Vincent, I'm assuming that's you with the megaphone, given that your credit card was used at the Shell station 2 blocks from here about 40 minutes ago." The leader, Vincent, visibly flinched. His 2 companions turned to stare at him, and Sarah could see their confidence evaporating in real time. "She's bluffing," the shorter robber hissed, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "There's no way she could know all that." But Sarah wasn't bluffing. While the 3 men had been inside the bank making their demands, she'd been running the license plates of every vehicle in the surrounding area through the department's database. It was a long shot, but in her experience, most criminals weren't nearly as smart as they thought they were. "James Kellerman," she continued, addressing the shorter robber, "currently on parole for armed robbery in Tucson. Your parole officer is going to be very disappointed. And Marcus Webb," she turned her attention to the linebacker, "3 outstanding warrants in New Mexico for assault and battery. You gentlemen picked the wrong bank, and definitely the wrong day." The 3 men huddled together, their weapons still raised but pointed at nothing in particular. Sarah could see them arguing, though she couldn't make out the words. This was the critical moment, when desperate people made stupid decisions that got everyone hurt. "Detective Mitchell," Captain Reynolds said quietly, "SWAT's here. We should let them handle the apprehension." Sarah glanced over her shoulder to see the black tactical van pulling into the parking lot, its occupants already suiting up in full gear. She understood the captain's position. This was supposed to be SWAT's show, and her improvised rescue had stolen their thunder, but she also knew that introducing more armed personnel into an already volatile situation could escalate things beyond anyone's control. "Give me 2 more minutes," she said. Before the captain could object, Sarah stepped out from behind the patrol car and walked slowly toward the bank. She kept her hands visible, the bullhorn dangling from her left hand, her right hand nowhere near her service weapon. "Vincent, James, Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the empty space between them. "Let's talk about your options here. You came here for money, right? Well, the money's still in the bank. The hostages are gone, nobody's been hurt, and at this point you're looking at robbery charges instead of kidnapping and assault with deadly weapons." Vincent raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Sarah. "Stop right there, cop!" Sarah stopped, but she didn't retreat. "You're scared, I get that. Plans don't always work out the way we expect them to. But right now, you've got a choice. You can surrender, and we can work out a deal where everyone goes home in one piece. Or you can keep this going, and it ends with SWAT tactical officers putting holes in all three of you. We're not going to prison, James shouted. We'd rather die fighting. Would you really? Sarah asked, taking another step forward. Because prison's not forever, James. You're what, 26? 27? You serve your time, you get out, you start over. Death is forever. Marcus, the linebacker, shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should listen to her, Vince. This isn't going like we planned. Shut up, Marcus, Vincent snapped. She's trying to get in our heads. I'm trying to save your lives, Sarah replied, and honestly, I'm trying to save myself some paperwork. Because if this goes sideways, I'm going to be filling out incident reports until Christmas. Despite the tension, Marcus actually cracked a smile at that. Sarah pressed her advantage. Here's what I'm thinking, she continued, now only about 20 feet from the three men. You put down your weapons, you walk out of here with your hands up, and I personally guarantee that you'll be treated fairly. No excessive force, no mysterious injuries during transport. Clean arrest, proper booking, and you get to call your lawyers before anyone asks you a single question. And if we don't? Vincent asked, though his rifle had lowered slightly. Sarah gestured toward the SWAT van, where tactical officers were now taking positions behind ballistic shields. Then those gentlemen over there are going to assume you're an active threat to public safety, and they're going to respond accordingly. And Vincent, I've worked with that SWAT team for 8 years. They're very good at their job, but their job isn't negotiation. The three men exchanged glances. Sarah could see the doubt creeping into their eyes, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and completely out of options. Detective Mitchell, Vincent said slowly, if we surrender, how do we know you'll keep your word about fair treatment? Because my word is all I've got in this job, Sarah replied. Ask anyone in this department. When Sarah Mitchell makes a promise, she keeps it. But that offer expires in about 30 seconds because my captain over there is getting antsy, and SWAT doesn't like to wait. James was the first to crack. He slowly lowered his weapon and raised his hands. This is crazy, Vince. We never should have tried this. Marcus followed suit, placing his rifle on the ground and stepping back with his hands raised. I'm not dying for some bank robbery, man. My kid's got a birthday next week. Vincent stood alone, his weapon still partially raised, looking back and forth between his surrendering partners and the approaching SWAT officers. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Pride versus survival, desperation versus logic. Vincent, she said softly, your friends made the smart choice. Don't make your family plan a funeral because you were too proud to admit when you were beat. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Vincent lowered his rifle. He set it on the ground and raised his hands above his head. Smart man, Sarah said, backing away as SWAT officers moved in to secure the scene. Within minutes, all three suspects were in custody, their weapons secured, and the bank declared safe. EMTs checked them for injuries, while crime scene techs began processing evidence. The whole operation had taken less than 45 minutes from start to finish. Captain Reynolds approached Sarah as she watched the suspects being loaded into transport vehicles. Mitchell, that was either the most brilliant piece of police work I've ever seen or the most reckless stunt in department history. Maybe both, Sarah admitted, finally allowing herself to relax. The hostages want to thank you personally. They're calling you a hero. Sarah shook her head. I'm not a hero, Captain. I just saw an opportunity and took it. Sometimes that's all police work really is. Recognizing the moment when you can make a difference and having the courage to act on it. Well, whatever you want to call it, the media is going to have a field day with this. Local detective frees hostages before demands are made. It's going to be front-page news. Sarah looked at the crowd of reporters and camera crews that had gathered behind the police perimeter, their lights and microphones already pointed in her direction. She'd spent 15 years trying to avoid that kind of attention, preferring to let her work speak for itself. Actually, Captain, I was thinking maybe we could focus the story on the teamwork aspect. Officer Chen's quick response, the SWAT team's professionalism, the bank's cooperation with the emergency codes. This wasn't a one-person operation. Captain Reynolds studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. You know, Mitchell, that's exactly why you're the right person for these situations. You could take all the credit, but you won't. The credit belongs to everyone who helped make it work, Sarah replied. "I just happened to be the one who crawled through the air vent." As the sun began to set over Phoenix, casting long shadows across the parking lot, Sarah finally allowed herself to think about what could have gone wrong. The suspects could have been more experienced, more desperate, more willing to use violence. The emergency exit code could have been changed. The hostages could have panicked and made noise. Any one of a dozen variables could have turned her calculated risk into a tragedy. But they hadn't. Sometimes, in police work, you got lucky. And sometimes, luck was just a preparation meeting opportunity at exactly the right moment. Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Detective Mitchell, we've got a situation downtown. Domestic disturbance, possible weapons involved. Are you available?" She looked at the scene around her, the arrests complete, the statements being taken, the paperwork that would follow. Another crisis was already waiting, another chance to make a difference in someone's life. "This is Detective Mitchell," she replied into her radio. "I'm en route." 3 weeks after the bank incident, Sarah Mitchell was discovering that being labeled a hero came with complications she'd never anticipated. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from news outlets across the country. The Phoenix Police Department's public relations team had fielded calls from CNN, Fox News, and even a producer from a true crime podcast who wanted to do a 6-part series on her revolutionary approach to hostage negotiation. Sarah had turned them all down. She was sitting at her desk, trying to focus on a missing persons case involving a teenager who disappeared from a shopping mall, when Detective Angela Torres dropped into the chair across from her. Angela had been with the department for 12 years and had a reputation for being direct to the point of bluntness. "So," Angela said, unwrapping a sandwich from the deli downstairs, "I heard Internal Affairs wants to interview you about the bank thing." Sarah looked up from her case files. "Where'd you hear that?" "Rodriguez mentioned it. Apparently, some of the SWAT guys are complaining that you made them look bad. They're saying you violated protocol and put civilians at risk with your cowboy tactics." "Cowboy tactics?" Sarah laughed, despite herself. "I crawled through an air conditioning vent and opened a door. If that's cowboy tactics, then I'm Annie Oakley." "Hey, I'm not criticizing," Angela said, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Those hostages went home to their families because of what you did. But you know how this department works. Someone always has to find fault with success." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but with a Las Vegas area code. "Detective Mitchell," she answered. "Detective, this is Agent Rebecca Carson with the FBI's Crisis Response Team. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to discuss the incident at First National Bank." Sarah sat up straighter. The FBI getting involved was either very good news or very bad news, and she had a feeling it wasn't good. "I'm listening, Agent Carson." "I've reviewed the incident reports and the surveillance footage from the bank. What you accomplished was remarkable, but it's also raised some questions at the federal level. We'd like to bring you to Quantico for a few days to analyze your methods and potentially incorporate them into our training programs." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. "And if I decline this invitation?" "Well, it's not exactly an invitation, Detective Mitchell. The bank robbery crossed state lines. The suspects had previously hit institutions in Nevada and New Mexico. That makes it federal jurisdiction, and we need to understand exactly how you bypassed established protocols to resolve the situation." "I see." Sarah glanced around the bullpen, noting that several other detectives had stopped working to listen to her side of the conversation. "When would you need me there?" "Monday morning. We'll arrange transportation. And detective? Bring your incident reports and any notes you might have made about your decision-making process during the event." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone for a moment, then looked up to find Angela watching her with concern. "FBI?" Angela asked. "FBI. That sucks." "Yeah, it really does." Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on her caseload, but her mind kept drifting to the implications of the federal investigation. The FBI didn't typically get involved in local police matters unless something had gone seriously wrong, or unless they saw an opportunity to learn something valuable. She hoped it was the latter, but 15 years of police work had taught her to expect the worst. At 6:30, as she was preparing to leave for the day, Captain Reynolds approached her desk. "Mitchell, walk with me," he said, heading toward his office. Sarah followed him into the glass-enclosed space that overlooked the main detective bullpen. Reynolds closed the door and gestured for her to sit. "I got a call from Washington today," he began, settling into his chair. "Seems your bank rescue has attracted attention from some very important people." "So I heard. Agent Carson wants me at Quantico on Monday." "That's not all." Reynolds pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it on his desk. "The Department of Homeland Security is launching a new task force focused on rapid response to domestic terrorist incidents. They want someone with unconventional tactical thinking to help develop new protocols." Sarah felt her heart sink. "They want to transfer me. They want to offer you a position, federal grade 13, which is about double what you're making now, plus a housing allowance and full benefits. You'd be based in Washington, working directly with the Secretary's office on crisis response strategy." "Captain, I don't want to leave Phoenix. This is my home, this department is my family." Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "Sarah, I've been a cop for 26 years, and I've seen maybe 3 officers who had the kind of instincts you showed at that bank. The feds don't make offers like this lightly. What do you think I should do?" "I think you should listen to what they have to say, but I also think you should remember that sometimes the best way to make a difference is to stay where you are and keep doing what you're already doing well." That evening, Sarah drove to her apartment in Scottsdale, a modest 2-bedroom place she'd called home for the past 8 years. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her balcony, looking out over the desert landscape as the sun painted the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Detective Mitchell, this is Tom Bradley from the bank. I wanted to thank you again for what you did. My wife Helen was one of the hostages. She hasn't stopped talking about how calm and professional you were. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to call." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Just doing my job, Tom. Give Helen my best." But even as she sent the message, she wondered if that was really true. Had she just been doing her job, or had she been showing off? The question had been nagging at her for weeks. Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed her sister's name. "Hey, Linda." "Sarah, I just saw the story about you on the national news. Mom's going crazy. She's been calling everyone in Cleveland to tell them her daughter is famous." Sarah groaned. "It's not that big a deal." "Are you kidding? You saved 12 people. The reporter said you did something that had never been done before in law enforcement." The reporter was exaggerating. "What I did was take a calculated risk that happened to work out." "Sarah, you need to stop downplaying this. What you did was amazing, and you should be proud of it." After she hung up with her sister, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had led her to that moment at the bank. She'd joined the Phoenix Police Department straight out of college, driven by a desire to make a real difference in people's lives. Over the years, she'd worked everything from traffic stops to homicide investigations, always trying to find creative solutions to complex problems. The bank incident hadn't been about heroics or glory. It had been about seeing an opportunity to end a dangerous situation quickly and safely. But now that opportunity was threatening to change her entire life. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Officer Chen. "Detective Mitchell, thought you should know. Vincent Murphy wants to talk. He's asking for you specifically. Says he has information about other jobs his crew was planning." Sarah stared at the message. Vincent Murphy, the leader of the bank robbery crew, had been held without bail pending trial. If he was willing to cooperate, it could mean more than just closing the bank case. It could lead to solving other crimes and potentially preventing future ones. She typed back, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." The Maricopa County Jail was a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Phoenix, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Sarah had been there countless times over the years, interviewing suspects and witnesses, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was walking in as someone whose entire career might be about to change. Vincent Murphy looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit than he had in his leather jacket and ski mask. He sat across from Sarah in the interview room, his hands folded on the metal table, his eyes avoiding direct contact. "Detective Mitchell," he said quietly, "thank you for coming. Officer Chen said you wanted to talk. I wanted to apologize first. What we did was stupid and dangerous, and people could have been hurt because of us." Sarah studied his face. In her experience, suspects who suddenly developed consciences usually wanted something in return. "What else, Vincent?" "We weren't working alone. There's a guy in Vegas who's been organizing jobs like this." Small banks, quick hits, minimal security. He promised us it would be easy money. Tell me about this guy. His name is Derek Lawton. He used to work for a security company that serviced banks throughout the Southwest. He knows all their systems, their response times, their vulnerabilities. He's been putting together crews and sending them out to hit specific targets. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If Murphy was telling the truth, the bank robbery hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a larger criminal enterprise. How many other jobs has Lawton organized? I don't know exactly, but at least 6 or 7 over the past year. Banks in Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado. He takes a cut of everything we steal, and in exchange he provides intelligence and equipment. Why are you telling me this, Vincent? Murphy finally looked up at her. Because what you did at the bank, getting those people out safely, it made me realize that we could have killed someone. That little girl who was crying, or that old man who looked like he was having trouble breathing. I've got a daughter, Detective Mitchell. She's only 5, but she looks just like that little girl in the bank. Sarah leaned forward. If you're willing to testify against Lawton, the prosecutor might be willing to work with you on your sentence. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything I know about his operation, but I want one thing in return. What's that? I want you to promise me that you'll stop him before he gets someone killed. Because if you don't, and something happens to an innocent person, I'll have that on my conscience for the rest of my life. Sarah extended her hand across the table. You have my word, Vincent. As she drove back to her apartment, Sarah realized that her decision about the FBI offer had just become much more complicated. Derek Lawton's criminal enterprise was exactly the kind of case that federal agencies were designed to handle: multi-state jurisdiction, complex coordination, and the resources to mount a comprehensive investigation. But it was also the kind of case that could benefit from someone who thought outside the box, someone who wasn't bound by conventional tactics and protocols. By the time she reached her apartment, Sarah had made up her mind. She would go to Quantico on Monday, but not as a potential recruit. She would go as a Phoenix police detective with information about a federal crime, and she would offer to work the case as a liaison between local and federal authorities. It wasn't the career change that Washington had in mind, but it was a way to make a difference on a larger scale while staying true to the department and the city that had made her the officer she was. Sometimes, the best way to change the system was to work within it, one case at a time. The FBI Academy at Quantico looked exactly like Sarah had imagined: imposing brick buildings set among Virginia pine trees, with federal agents in training jogging along pristine pathways. She'd flown out Sunday night and spent a restless evening in a hotel room, rehearsing the conversation she planned to have with Agent Carson. Monday morning arrived gray and humid, a stark contrast to the desert climate Sarah was accustomed to. She presented her credentials at the main gate and was escorted to a conference room in the Behavioral Analysis Unit building, where Agent Carson was waiting with 2 other people she didn't recognize. Detective Mitchell, thank you for coming, Carson said, rising from her seat. She was younger than Sarah had expected, probably mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I'd like you to meet Dr. Jonathan Webb from our Crisis Negotiation Unit and Agent Paul Hendricks from our Violent Crime Task Force. Sarah shook hands with both men, noting Webb's academic demeanor and Hendricks' suspicious expression. This wasn't going to be the friendly consultation she'd hoped for. Before we begin, Sarah said, settling into her chair, I have information about a multi-state criminal enterprise that I believe falls under federal jurisdiction. The 3 federal agents exchanged glances. Carson leaned forward. Detective, we're here to discuss your methods during the bank incident, not to. Vincent Murphy, the leader of the Phoenix bank robbery crew, has provided information about a crime boss named Derek Lawton, who's been organizing bank robberies across the Southwest, Sarah interrupted. Murphy claims Lawton has orchestrated at least 7 similar incidents over the past year. Agent Hendricks opened a laptop and began typing. Derek Lawton. We have a file on him. Former security consultant, suspected of involvement in several armed robberies but never charged. What specific information did Murphy provide? Sarah pulled out a digital recorder. I have a recorded statement from Murphy detailing Lawton's operation, including target selection, crew recruitment, and profit distribution. But I want to discuss terms before I turn this over. Dr. Webb raised an eyebrow. Terms? Detective, you're obligated to share information about federal crimes with appropriate authorities. I am aware of my obligations, Dr. Webb. I'm also aware that my department has jurisdiction over Murphy's case, and any cooperation agreement would need to be coordinated between local and federal prosecutors. Carson smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. You want to be part of the investigation. I want to make sure Derek Lawton is stopped before someone gets killed. Murphy is willing to work undercover to help us gather evidence, but he trusts me. Take me out of the equation, and you lose your best asset. The three agents huddled in quiet conversation for several minutes. Sarah used the time to study the room, noting the awards and commendations covering the walls, the sophisticated technology setup, and the subtle but unmistakable message that this was serious federal business. Detective Mitchell, Carson said finally, we're prepared to offer you a temporary assignment as a liaison officer with our task force. You'd maintain your Phoenix PD rank and salary, but you'd be working directly with us to develop the case against Lawton. How temporary? 6 months, with possible extension based on case development and your performance. Sarah considered the offer. 6 months away from Phoenix. Away from the cases and colleagues she knew. Working with federal agents who clearly had reservations about her methods. But it was also an opportunity to take down a criminal who was putting innocent people at risk across multiple states. I accept, but with conditions. Murphy stays in Phoenix custody, and all coordination with him goes through me. Any undercover operations involving him are planned jointly between Phoenix PD and the task force. And I want regular briefings on all related cases, not just the ones you think I need to know about. Agent Hendricks looked skeptical. You're asking for a lot of control for someone who violated protocol during your last major case. That protocol violation saved 12 lives and led us to Lawton, Sarah replied evenly. Maybe it's time to consider that sometimes the old ways of doing things aren't the best ways. Dr. Webb cleared his throat. Detective, we've analyzed the surveillance footage from the bank incident extensively. Your decision to enter the building alone was statistically likely to result in either your death or the death of hostages. The fact that it worked doesn't validate the approach. Sarah felt her temper flare, but kept her voice calm. Dr. Webb, with respect, statistics don't account for human judgment, environmental factors, or tactical flexibility. I made a real-time assessment based on direct observation and my understanding of the suspect's psychological state. Your statistics assume I was operating randomly, which I wasn't. Explain your reasoning, Carson interjected with genuine curiosity in her voice. Sarah stood and moved to the whiteboard, mounted on the conference room wall. The suspects had been inside the bank for 8 minutes without making contact. That suggested either inexperience or indecision. When the leader finally emerged to make demands, his body language indicated high stress and uncertainty, constantly scanning for threats, defensive posture, weapon handling that suggested limited training. She drew a rough diagram of the bank layout. The building's design created a tactical advantage. The vault was isolated from the main lobby. The suspects were focused on external threats, and the emergency exit provided a secure evacuation route that bypassed their position entirely. But you couldn't have known the exit code would work, Hendricks pointed out. No, but I had a backup plan. If the code failed, I could have created a distraction in the mechanical room that would have drawn at least one suspect away from the hostages, improving the odds for a conventional SWAT entry. Carson was taking notes. What would you have done if the suspects had discovered you in the vault? Depends on their reaction. If they panicked, I would have tried to de-escalate while positioning myself between them and the hostages. If they became aggressive, I would have used the confined space to neutralize the immediate threat while the hostages escaped through the exit. Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair. You're describing a series of high-risk improvisations, not a tactical plan. I'm describing adaptive problem-solving under pressure, which is what police work actually is 90% of the time, Sarah replied. Your training scenarios assume controlled variables and predictable outcomes. Real situations are messy, complicated, and require officers to think on their feet. Agent Carson closed her notepad. Detective Mitchell, I think you'll find that federal law enforcement involves plenty of adaptive problem-solving, but it also requires coordination, oversight, and accountability. Are you prepared to work within those constraints? Sarah returned to her seat. Agent Carson, I've worked within departmental constraints for 15 years. But I've also learned that sometimes you have to push boundaries to get results. If you want my help with Lawton, you're going to get both aspects of my approach. The meeting broke up with an agreement to begin the task force assignment the following week. Sarah would return to Phoenix to arrange her temporary reassignment and coordinate Murphy's cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office. As she waited for her flight at Reagan National Airport, Sarah's phone rang. It was Captain Reynolds. "Mitchell, how did it go with the feds?" "Mixed bag, Captain. They want me to work on a joint task force investigating a multi-state robbery ring. 6 months, possibly longer." "And you said yes?" "I said yes. This Derek Lawton character needs to be stopped, and Murphy is our best shot at building a case against him." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, be careful. Federal agencies have their own agendas, and they don't always align with local law enforcement interests. Don't let them use you and then throw you away when the case is over." "I'll be careful, Captain, but this is bigger than just the Phoenix Bank job. If Lawton's been organizing robberies across multiple states, there could be dozens of potential victims we can protect. Just remember where your home is, Mitchell. Washington has a way of making people forget their roots." The flight back to Phoenix gave Sarah time to think about the challenges ahead. Working with federal agents would mean navigating bureaucracy, politics, and competing priorities she'd never had to deal with as a local detective. But it also meant access to resources and intelligence networks that could make a real difference in stopping Lawton's operation. When she landed in Phoenix, she drove directly to the county jail to brief Vincent Murphy on the new arrangement. She found him in the same interview room where they'd first discussed Lawton, looking nervous but determined. "Detective Mitchell, did you talk to the FBI?" "I did, Vincent. They're interested in your information about Lawton, and they're willing to work with us to build a case against him." "What does that mean for me?" Sarah sat across from him. "It means you're going to help us catch him. You'll remain in Phoenix custody, but you'll be working with federal agents to gather evidence about his operation. If everything goes according to plan, the prosecutor will recommend a reduced sentence in exchange for your cooperation." Murphy nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I need you to tell me everything you know about Lawton's operation. Names, locations, methods, everything. Then, depending on what the task force decides, you might need to make contact with him and pretend you're still available for jobs." "You mean go undercover?" "Potentially. But Vincent, I want you to understand the risks. If Lawton suspects you're working with law enforcement, you could be in serious danger." Murphy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Detective, that little girl in the bank vault, she reminded me of my daughter Emma. If I don't help stop Lawton, and something happens to a kid because of one of his jobs, I'll never forgive myself." "Then let's make sure that doesn't happen," Sarah said. Over the next 2 hours, Murphy provided detailed information about Lawton's operation. The crime boss maintained a headquarters in Las Vegas, recruited crews from across the Southwest, and used his security industry contacts to identify vulnerable targets. He typically planned jobs months in advance, studying bank locations, security systems, and local law enforcement response times. Most concerning was Murphy's revelation that Lawton had been escalating his operations. The early jobs had been relatively simple, small banks with minimal security. But recent targets had been larger institutions with more sophisticated defenses, requiring more aggressive tactics and heavier weapons. "He's been talking about hitting a Federal Reserve branch," Murphy said. "Said it would be the biggest score in the history of bank robbery." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. A Federal Reserve robbery would involve massive security, federal agents, and potentially deadly force. If Lawton was serious about such a target, the stakes had just become much higher. "Vincent, when did he mention the Federal Reserve idea?" "About 2 weeks before we hit the Phoenix Bank. He said he was still in the planning stages, but he wanted crews to start thinking bigger." Sarah made detailed notes, knowing that this information would completely change the federal task force's priorities. A planned attack on a Federal Reserve facility was the kind of threat that would mobilize resources across multiple agencies. As she drove home that evening, Sarah realized that her 6-month assignment with the FBI was likely to become much more complex and dangerous than she'd anticipated. Derek Lawton wasn't just organizing bank robberies. He was building towards something that could result in a catastrophic confrontation with federal law enforcement. The question was whether they could stop him before he reached that point, and whether Sarah's unconventional methods would be an asset or a liability in a federal investigation where the stakes were higher than anything she'd ever faced. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Carson. Task Force briefing tomorrow at 0800. New intelligence suggests Lawton is accelerating his timeline. We need to move fast. Sarah stared at the message, understanding that her quiet life as a Phoenix detective was about to become very complicated indeed. The FBI field office in Las Vegas operated out of a nondescript building on South Las Vegas Boulevard, deliberately designed to blend in with the commercial sprawl surrounding it. Sarah arrived at 7:30 Tuesday morning, still adjusting to the fact that she was now officially part of a federal task force hunting one of the most ambitious bank robbery rings in recent history. Agent Carson met her in the lobby, looking like she hadn't slept much. "Detective Mitchell, glad you could make it on short notice. We've got some developments you need to see." They took an elevator to the 4th floor, where Sarah was surprised to find a bustling operations center that looked more like a military command post than a typical FBI office. Multiple screens displayed surveillance footage, financial records, and detailed maps of potential targets across 5 states. "Impressive setup," Sarah said. "Derek Lawton has forced us to think bigger," Carson replied, leading her to a conference table where several agents were already assembled. "Let me introduce you to the rest of the team." Sarah found herself facing 6 federal agents, each representing different specialties within the Bureau. Agent Marcus Cole from the Financial Crimes Division had been tracking Lawton's money laundering operations. Agent Diana Walsh from Behavioral Analysis had developed a psychological profile of their target. Agent Steve Ramirez from the Tactical Operations Unit would coordinate any arrests or raids. "Detective Mitchell," Agent Cole began, "we've been analyzing financial records from the banks Lawton has targeted. There's a pattern we missed initially. He's not just stealing money, he's gathering intelligence about federal banking systems." Sarah leaned forward. "What kind of intelligence?" Agent Walsh pulled up a series of documents on the main screen. Transaction protocols, security update schedules, personnel access codes. Information that would be valuable to someone planning a much larger operation. "The Federal Reserve job Vincent Murphy mentioned," Sarah said. "Exactly, but it's worse than we thought." Carson activated another display showing a detailed floor plan. "We believe Lawton is targeting the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. It processes currency for the entire western United States and typically holds between $50 and $70 million in cash reserves." Agent Ramirez shook his head grimly. "A facility like that has multiple layers of security. Armed guards, electronic surveillance, reinforced barriers, and direct connections to local SWAT and federal response teams. Anyone trying to rob it would be signing their own death warrant. Unless they had inside information about vulnerabilities," Sarah said. "Lawton's background is security consulting. He'd know exactly what to look for." Carson nodded. "That's our concern. We think he's been using the smaller bank jobs as training exercises and intelligence-gathering missions, building toward this one major score." Sarah studied the floor plan, her mind automatically analyzing potential entry points and escape routes. "When do you think he's planning to move?" "Soon," Agent Cole replied. "Our financial analysis shows he's been liquidating assets and moving money offshore. Classic preparation for either a major operation or a permanent disappearance." "We need to accelerate our timeline," Carson said. "Which brings us to why you're here, Detective Mitchell. Vincent Murphy is our best asset for getting inside Lawton's organization, but he needs someone he trusts to coordinate with." Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Agent Walsh leaned forward. "We want Murphy to contact Lawton and volunteer for the Federal Reserve job. If Lawton accepts, Murphy becomes our inside man during the planning phase. And if Lawton gets suspicious, then Murphy disappears, and we lose our only chance to stop this before it happens," Carson said bluntly. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Asking Vincent Murphy to infiltrate Lawton's organization was essentially asking him to risk his life. But if they didn't stop Lawton, the Federal Reserve robbery could result in multiple deaths. Guards, employees, potentially innocent bystanders. "I'll need to talk to Murphy first," she said finally. "This has to be his choice." "Of course. But Detective, time is not on our side here. Every day we delay gives Lawton more opportunity to finalize his plans." The meeting broke up with an agreement to reconvene that evening after Sarah had spoken with Murphy. As the other agents dispersed to their various assignments, Carson pulled Sarah aside. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "We've been monitoring Lawton's communications, and he's been asking questions about the Phoenix bank job. Specifically, he wants to know how his crew got caught so quickly." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Does he suspect Murphy is cooperating?" "We don't think so, but he's definitely curious about what went wrong. If Murphy contacts him, Lawton might ask detailed questions about the arrest. Then we need to make sure Murphy has a convincing story." Sarah spent the flight back to Phoenix developing a cover story that would explain Murphy's arrest without revealing his cooperation with law enforcement. By the time she reached the county jail, she had a narrative that she hoped would satisfy Lawton's suspicions while keeping Murphy safe. She found Murphy in the jail's law library reading a book about criminal procedure. He looked up when she entered, his expression anxious. "Detective Mitchell, how did it go in Vegas?" Sarah sat across from him at the small table. "Vincent, the situation is more serious than we initially thought. Lawton isn't just organizing bank robberies. He's planning something that could get a lot of people killed." She explained about the Federal Reserve target, the intelligence gathering, and the task force's urgency. Murphy listened intently, his face growing paler with each detail. "You want me to volunteer for the Federal Reserve job," he said when she finished. "I want you to understand what we're asking of you. This isn't just about cooperation anymore. This is about preventing what could be a massacre. But Vincent, if you say no, I'll understand. You've already provided valuable information, and that might be enough to—" "No," Murphy interrupted. "It won't be enough. If Lawton is really planning something that big, you need someone inside his operation. And I'm the only option you've got." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or fear. She found both, but she also saw determination. "The risk is significant, Vincent. If Lawton suspects you're working with us, then I'm dead. I get it, detective. But if I don't help, and innocent people die because Lawton succeeds, I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. My daughter Emma is going to grow up either proud of her father for doing the right thing or ashamed of him for being a coward." Sarah reached across the table and shook his hand. "Then, let's make sure she's proud." They spent the next 2 hours rehearsing Murphy's cover story. He would tell Lawton that he'd been arrested during a routine traffic stop 3 days after the bank robbery, when a patrol officer had recognized his vehicle from a bolo alert. The story explained his capture without implicating anyone else or suggesting law enforcement had inside information. "Lawton will want to know about your crew," Sarah said, "James Kellerman and Marcus Webb. I'll tell him they're keeping quiet, hoping for plea deals." Which is actually true. Neither of them knows about our arrangement. "And if he asks about the hostage situation specifically?" Murphy thought for a moment. "I'll say the cops got lucky, that they must have had someone watching the building who saw an opportunity when we were distracted." Sarah nodded. It was plausible enough to be believable, and it didn't reveal anything about her unconventional entry method. "Vincent, once you make contact with Lawton, everything changes. You'll be wearing a wire for any face-to-face meetings, and we'll have surveillance teams monitoring your movements. But there will be times when you're completely on your own, and you'll have to make decisions without backup." "What kind of decisions?" "If Lawton asks you to do something illegal as a test of loyalty, if he wants you to hurt someone to prove you're committed. If the situation escalates, and you have to choose between maintaining your cover and protecting innocent lives." Murphy was quiet for a long moment. "What would you do, Detective Mitchell?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I'd remember that the goal is to stop Lawton from hurting people. Everything else is secondary to that. Even my own safety? Vincent, I can't ask you to sacrifice your life for this operation. But I can ask you to be smart, be careful, and trust that we'll do everything possible to keep you safe." They arranged for Murphy to make initial contact with Lawton that evening, using a cell phone number the task force had obtained through surveillance. The call would be monitored and recorded, providing the first real-time intelligence about Lawton's current plans. As Sarah prepared to leave the jail, Murphy called out to her. "Detective Mitchell, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you went into that bank to get the hostages out, were you scared?" Sarah thought about the question. "Terrified. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't act than I was of what might happen if I did. That's how I feel right now." That evening, Sarah sat in a van outside the county jail with Agent Carson, and 2 FBI technicians, listening as Vincent Murphy placed the most important phone call of his life. The conversation would determine whether they could infiltrate Lawton's organization or whether their investigation would hit a dead end. Murphy's voice was steady as he dialed the number. "Derek? It's Vincent Murphy. I need to talk." Lawton's voice came through the speakers clearly, suspicious but not hostile. "Vincent, I heard you had some trouble in Phoenix." "Yeah, bad luck. Got pulled over 3 days later for a busted taillight, and the cop recognized my car from the bolo. But Derek, I kept my mouth shut. Haven't said a word about you or the operation. What about your crew? James and Marcus are staying quiet too. We're all hoping for plea deals, but nobody's talking about our business." There was a long pause. Sarah held her breath, knowing that Lawton was making a decision that would affect everything that followed. "Vincent, I might have something coming up. Something big. Are you interested in making some real money?" Murphy glanced at the recording equipment in front of him. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can you get to Vegas tomorrow?" "I'm out on bail pending trial. I can travel within state boundaries, but leaving Arizona might be a problem." Another pause. "I'll come to you. Phoenix has some advantages I've been considering anyway." Sarah felt her heart racing. If Lawton was coming to Phoenix, it meant the operation was moving faster than they'd anticipated. "Where do you want to meet?" Murphy asked. "I'll call you tomorrow with details. And Vincent, make sure you aren't followed wherever we meet. I've got too much invested in this to take any chances." The line went dead. In the van, the FBI technicians immediately began analyzing the conversation while Carson coordinated with the Las Vegas office. "He's coming here," Sarah said. "That means we need local surveillance teams, backup units, and a safe house for Murphy." Carson nodded grimly. "It also means Derek Lawton is confident enough in his plans to risk traveling to meet with a crew member who was recently arrested. That level of confidence usually indicates someone who thinks they're about to disappear forever." As Sarah drove home that night, she realized that the next 24 hours would likely determine whether they could stop the most ambitious bank robbery in federal law enforcement history, or whether Derek Lawton would vanish with the resources to try again somewhere else. Either way, there was no turning back now. Derek Lawton arrived in Phoenix like a man who owned the city. Sarah watched from a surveillance van as he stepped out of a black Mercedes at the Phoenician resort. Dressed in an expensive suit and moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of tan that came from expensive vacations rather than outdoor work. "That's our target," Agent Carson said, adjusting the focus on her binoculars. 20 years in private security, 8 years running his own consulting firm, and now apparently organizing the most sophisticated bank robbery ring in the Southwest. Sarah studied Lawton's movements as he handed his keys to a valet and strode into the hotel lobby. Everything about him suggested wealth and success, the opposite of what she'd expected from a career criminal. "He doesn't look like someone who needs to rob banks," she observed. "That's what makes him dangerous," Carson replied. "This isn't about money for him, it's about the challenge. Our behavioral analysis suggests he views bank robbery as the ultimate test of his security expertise." Sarah's radio crackled. "Surveillance Team 2. Target has checked into the penthouse suite under the name David Lawrence. The credit card shows a Vegas address." "Copy that," Carson responded. "All teams maintain distance. We don't want to spook him before he makes contact with Murphy." The call came 3 hours later. Sarah and Carson were monitoring Murphy's cell phone from the FBI's mobile command center when Lawton's number appeared on the display. "Vincent, I'm in town. Meet me at the Desert Ridge Shopping Center, north parking lot in 1 hour. Come alone and make sure you're clean." "I'll be there," Murphy replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. After Lawton hung up, Murphy looked directly at the hidden camera in his cell. "He wants to meet in a public place. That's either very good or very bad." Sarah leaned toward the microphone. "Vincent, public places usually mean he's being cautious, not suspicious. But stay alert. If anything feels wrong, abort the meeting." "Roger that." The Desert Ridge Shopping Center was a sprawling outdoor mall popular with tourists and locals alike. Sarah positioned herself at a coffee shop with a clear view of the north parking lot, while Carson coordinated surveillance teams around the perimeter. Murphy arrived first, parking his borrowed car near the center of the lot and waiting. Lawton appeared exactly on time, driving a different vehicle, a white BMW with California plates. He parked 3 spaces away from Murphy and gestured for him to get in. "Audio check," Sarah whispered into her earpiece. "Clear reception," came the response from the technical team. Through the surveillance equipment, Sarah could hear every word of the conversation as Murphy climbed into Lawton's car. "Vincent, good to see you again," Lawton said, his voice warm but calculating. "Tell me about Phoenix. What went wrong with the job?" Murphy launched into the rehearsed cover story, describing the traffic stop and his subsequent arrest. Lawton listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that suggested he was testing the narrative for inconsistencies. "Your crew kept their mouths shut?" Lawton asked. "James and Marcus know the rules. We don't talk, we don't deal, we do our time." "Good. Loyalty is rare in this business, Vincent. It's also valuable." Sarah watched through binoculars as Lawton reached into his jacket. For a moment she tensed, but he only pulled out a tablet computer. "I want to show you something," Lawton said. "This is why I came to Phoenix personally." The tablet's screen wasn't visible to the surveillance cameras, but Murphy's reaction was telling. His voice became more tense as he responded. That's a federal facility." "The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco," Lawton confirmed. $120 million in cash reserves, plus negotiable securities worth another $50 million. "Derek, that's not a bank robbery, that's a war zone. They've got armed guards, electronic security, direct lines to federal response teams." "They've got all those things, yes, but they also have weaknesses that most people don't know about." "Vincent, I spent 2 years consulting on security upgrades for federal banking facilities. I know exactly where those weaknesses are." Sarah felt her blood run cold. If Lawton had inside knowledge of federal security protocols, the situation was even more dangerous than they'd realized. "What kind of weaknesses?" Murphy asked. "The kind that requires a very specific type of operation, not a quick grab-and-go like your Phoenix job, but a carefully orchestrated extraction that exploits systematic vulnerabilities in their response procedures." Lawton tapped the tablet screen, apparently showing Murphy additional details. "The Federal Reserve processes currency shipments every Tuesday and Thursday. During those operations, their normal security protocols are temporarily modified to accommodate the logistics. That creates a window of opportunity for someone who knows what to look for." "How long is the window?" 47 minutes. Enough time to get in, secure the primary vault, and extract the maximum possible assets before federal response teams can coordinate an effective counter-operation." Sarah realized she was holding her breath. Lawton wasn't just planning a bank robbery, he was planning a precision military-style assault on a federal installation. "Derek, even if we could pull this off, how do we get away? Every law enforcement agency in California would be looking for us." "That's the beautiful part, Vincent. We don't run, we disappear." Lawton apparently showed Murphy something else on the tablet, because Murphy's next words suggested genuine shock. "Jesus Christ, Derek. You're talking about killing federal agents." "I'm talking about neutralizing threats to the operation." "Vincent, this isn't some small-time bank job where we worry about hurting people's feelings. This is a one-time score that sets us up for life, but it requires absolute commitment." Sarah grabbed her radio. "All teams, stand by. The subject is discussing plans for violence against federal agents." Through the audio feed, she could hear Murphy struggling to maintain his cover while processing what Lawton was proposing. "I need to think about this, Derek. What you're describing, it's not what I signed up for." "What you signed up for was making money, Vincent. This is how we make real money, but I understand your hesitation. Take tonight to consider it. I'll call you tomorrow morning for your answer." "And if I say no?" There was a long pause before Lawton responded. "Vincent, you're one of only 3 people who knows about this operation. I can't afford to have anyone walking around with that kind of information if they're not committed to seeing it through." The threat was clear, even without being explicitly stated. Murphy was now trapped. He either participated in the Federal Reserve robbery or risked being eliminated as a security risk. "I understand," Murphy said quietly. "Good, I'll be in touch tomorrow." Sarah watched as Murphy got out of the BMW and walked back to his own car. Lawton waited until Murphy had driven away before starting his engine and leaving in the opposite direction. "All teams, subjects are mobile," Carson announced. Team 3. Maintain surveillance on the target. Team 1. Escort Murphy back to base. An hour later, Sarah found herself back in the county jail, sitting across from Vincent Murphy in the interview room. He looked shaken by his encounter with Lawton, and she didn't blame him. "Vincent, you did well out there. You maintained your cover and gathered crucial intelligence." "Detective Mitchell, this guy isn't just planning a robbery, he's planning a massacre. Those federal agents at the Reserve Bank, they're just doing their jobs, and Lawton wants to kill them like they're obstacles in a video game." Sarah leaned forward. "That's why we have to stop him. But Vincent, I need to know, are you still willing to go through with this? Because after that conversation, the stakes just got much higher." "Better." Murphy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "My daughter Emma, she's 5 years old. She still thinks her daddy is a good guy who just made some mistakes. If I back out now, and Lawton kills those federal agents, how do I explain that to her when she's old enough to understand?" "You don't have to explain anything to anyone if you're dead, Vincent. And I don't have to live with myself if innocent people die because I was too scared to do the right thing." Sarah felt a surge of respect for the man sitting across from her. 3 weeks ago, Vincent Murphy had been the leader of a bank robbery crew. Now he was risking his life to prevent a terrorist attack on a federal installation. "Okay, Vincent. Tomorrow morning, when Lawton calls, you're going to tell him you're in. But from that point forward, you're going to be in extreme danger. Every conversation, every meeting, every moment you're in his presence could be your last if he becomes suspicious. What's the plan for stopping him?" "That's being worked out by people much higher up the chain than me. But our job is to gather as much intelligence as possible about his operation. Timing, personnel, weapons, exact target details. The more we know, the better chance we have of stopping him before he can hurt anyone." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Carson. "Emergency briefing. 1 hour. The situation has escalated. Vincent, I have to go. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow is going to be the hardest day of your life." The emergency briefing was held in the FBI's Phoenix field office, a secure facility downtown that Sarah had never seen before. Agent Carson was waiting with a room full of federal agents she didn't recognize, plus Captain Reynolds from Phoenix PD. "Detective Mitchell," Carson began, "we've got a problem. Our surveillance teams lost Derek Lawton an hour after his meeting with Murphy." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Lost him how?" "He switched vehicles twice, used counter-surveillance techniques that suggest professional training, and eventually disappeared into the underground parking garage of a downtown hotel. By the time our people could get into position, he was gone." Agent Ramirez from the tactical unit looked grim. "We think he made our surveillance teams. That means he knows we're watching Murphy." "Not necessarily," Sarah said. "Lawton strikes me as someone who assumes he's being watched regardless. Counter-surveillance might just be standard procedure for him." Captain Reynolds leaned forward. "Sarah, what's your assessment of Murphy's safety?" "If Lawton suspected Murphy was cooperating, he would have dealt with him during their meeting. The fact that he let Murphy go suggests he still believes the cover story." "But for how long?" Carson asked. "If Lawton is as smart as we think he is, he's going to start asking harder questions, testing Murphy's loyalty in ways that could expose the operation." Sarah realized that the next phase of the investigation would require split-second decisions and perfect execution. One mistake, one moment of hesitation or doubt, and Vincent Murphy would pay with his life. "What's our timeline?" she asked. "Based on Murphy's intelligence, Lawton is planning to move on the Federal Reserve next Thursday, 6 days from now. That gives us less than a week to gather enough evidence to stop him and keep Murphy alive in the process." As the briefing broke up, Sarah found herself wondering if 6 days would be enough time to prevent what could be the deadliest bank robbery in American history, and whether Vincent Murphy, a small-time criminal turned reluctant hero, would survive long enough to see his daughter again. Thursday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill in the San Francisco air. Sarah Mitchell stood on the roof of a building 6 blocks from the Federal Reserve Bank, watching through high-powered binoculars as armored trucks began their weekly currency delivery. In 18 hours of surveillance, she'd memorized every detail of the facility's operations, every movement pattern of the guards, every vulnerability that Derek Lawton might exploit. "Detective Mitchell, status report," Agent Carson's voice crackled through her earpiece. "All quiet on the target. Normal operations proceeding as scheduled. no sign of hostile surveillance. The past 6 days had been the most intense of Sarah's career. After losing Lawton in Phoenix, the task force had relocated to San Francisco, working around the clock to identify his team and predict his attack strategy. Vincent Murphy had played his role perfectly, feeding Lawton false information about his willingness to participate while secretly recording every conversation. 3 days ago, they'd finally gotten the break they needed. Murphy had convinced Lawton to let him scout the Federal Reserve facility, providing the task force with detailed intelligence about the criminal's actual plan. What they'd discovered was both brilliant and terrifying. Lawton wasn't planning a traditional robbery at all. Instead, he intended to exploit a little-known protocol in federal banking security. During currency processing operations, the Federal Reserve temporarily transferred certain security responsibilities to private contractors to accommodate the logistics of moving massive amounts of cash. For exactly 47 minutes every Thursday, a window existed where someone with insider knowledge could potentially bypass multiple layers of protection. Overwatch 2, movement on the northwest approach, Agent Ramirez reported from his position across the street. Sarah swung her binoculars toward the indicated direction and immediately spotted 3 men in maintenance uniforms walking toward the Federal Reserve's service entrance. They moved with military precision, their coveralls concealing body armor and weapons. "That's them," she said into her radio. "Lawton's crew is moving into position." The plan they developed was Sarah's idea, based on the same unconventional thinking that had resolved the Phoenix bank crisis. Instead of trying to stop Lawton before he entered the building, which would require a massive show of force that could endanger federal employees, they would let him begin his operation and then neutralize him from the inside. Sarah had studied the Federal Reserve's layout extensively, identifying an approach route that paralleled Lawton's entry point but remained invisible to his team. While Lawton focused on the main vault, she would be moving through the building's maintenance corridors to cut off his escape route. "Detective Mitchell, you are cleared for approach," Carson's voice confirmed. Sarah moved to the building's edge, where a zipline had been installed, connecting to the Federal Reserve's roof. It was the kind of entry method that would have horrified traditional FBI tacticians, but it was also the kind of creative solution that no criminal would anticipate. The zipline carried her silently across the gap between buildings, landing her on the Federal Reserve's roof with barely a sound. From there, she accessed the same type of maintenance corridor that had served her so well in Phoenix, dropping down into the building's infrastructure level. Through her earpiece, she could hear the operation unfolding in real time. Lawton's team had successfully entered the building and was moving toward the currency processing area. Federal employees had been evacuated under the cover of a scheduled fire drill, leaving only essential security personnel who were coordinating with the FBI. "Target 1 is approaching the main vault," Agent Ramirez reported. "Estimate 4 minutes until breach." Sarah moved through the narrow corridor, following the building's blueprints toward the vault area. Her goal was to reach the emergency exit before Lawton could secure it, trapping his team inside the vault while federal agents controlled the building's perimeter. She reached the junction that led to the vault level and carefully opened the access panel. Beyond it lay a mechanical room identical to the one she'd used in Phoenix, complete with the same type of ventilation system that had allowed her to observe the hostages before. Through the thin wall, she could hear voices, Lawton directing his team as they worked to bypass the vault's electronic locks. His tone was calm and professional, the voice of someone executing a plan he'd rehearsed countless times. "Charges set," one of his team members reported. 30 seconds to breach." Sarah found the ventilation grate and began removing the screws, working as quickly and quietly as possible. She needed to be inside the vault area before Lawton's team completed their entry, ready to cut off their retreat when federal agents began their coordinated response. The explosive breach came exactly on schedule, a muffled thump that shook the walls around her. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the building. Not the building's actual alarms, which had been disabled, but pre-recorded sounds designed to convince Lawton that his operation was proceeding normally. Sarah slipped through the ventilation grate into a storage room adjacent to the main vault. Through the doorway, she could see Lawton's team moving with practiced efficiency, loading cash and securities into military-style duffel bags. 23 minutes remaining, Lawton announced to his crew. "Stay on schedule." Sarah activated her throat microphone. "I'm in position." The target team is focused on asset extraction. Request permission to proceed to Phase 2. Negative, Detective Mitchell, Carson's voice replied. Federal tactical teams are still getting into position. Maintain observation only. But as Sarah watched Lawton's operation, she realized that something was wrong. The criminal mastermind was too calm, too confident. He was moving like someone who knew exactly what federal law enforcement was planning. Agent Carson, she whispered urgently, I think Lawton knows about our operation. What makes you say that? He's not posting any lookouts. He's not checking his escape routes. He's acting like someone who doesn't expect to be interrupted. Before Carson could respond, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She spun around to find Derek Lawton himself standing in the storage room doorway, pointing a pistol directly at her chest. Detective Sarah Mitchell, he said with a cold smile. Phoenix Police Department, temporarily assigned to an FBI task force investigating interstate bank robbery. Did I get that right? Sarah's mind raced, calculating distances and angles. Lawton was too far away for her to reach before he could fire, and the narrow room offered no cover. How long have you known? She asked. Since the day Vincent Murphy called me. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a setup? Vincent's been feeding you information about my operation while you fed him false intelligence about federal security protocols. Then why did you come here? Lawton's smile widened. Because this was never about robbing the Federal Reserve, Detective Mitchell. This was about drawing out the law enforcement officer who's been disrupting my business. The woman who thinks she's smarter than everyone else, who doesn't follow protocol, who believes she can solve any problem with creativity and courage. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she understood the trap she'd walked into. Vincent Murphy is perfectly safe, along with his daughter Emma. They're both under federal protection now, which was always part of my plan. You see, Detective, I needed Vincent to be convincing when he contacted you, and the best way to ensure that was to make sure he genuinely believed he was helping to stop a robbery. But your crew are federal agents, just like the ones currently surrounding this building. The only real criminal in this room is me, and the only real target of this operation is you. Sarah's radio crackled to life. Agent Carson's voice sounded different now, colder, more formal. Detective Mitchell, this is Agent Rebecca Carson. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit armed robbery, violation of federal law enforcement protocols, and endangering the lives of federal personnel. Lawton lowered his weapon slightly. You see, Detective, your unconventional methods have been causing problems for federal law enforcement for quite some time. The Phoenix Bank incident made you a media hero, but it also made you a liability. People started questioning why FBI negotiators couldn't accomplish what one local detective could do in 20 minutes. So this whole thing was designed to discredit me. This whole thing was designed to eliminate you as a factor in federal operations. Your methods work, Detective Mitchell, but they also make everyone else look incompetent. That's not good for budgets, promotions, or the federal law enforcement hierarchy. Sarah realized that she'd been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. The bank robbery, Vincent Murphy's cooperation, even her assignment to the task force, all of it had been orchestrated to lure her into a situation where she could be neutralized. There's just one problem with your plan, she said. What's that? You assumed I would follow the same pattern I used in Phoenix, but I learned something from that experience. And what was that? Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to make it someone else's problem. Sarah activated the emergency release for the building's fire suppression system, flooding the vault area with CO2 and thick foam. In the chaos that followed, she dove through the ventilation grate back into the mechanical room, sealing it behind her. Her radio was useless now. The federal agents coordinating the operation against her would be tracking her location through the device. She pulled out the battery and began moving through the building's infrastructure, following the same route she'd used to enter. The zip line was still in place, but federal agents were now positioned on the opposite rooftop. Sarah needed a different escape route, one that would get her clear of the immediate area and give her time to think. She found it in the building's parking garage, where maintenance vehicles provided cover for her to reach street level. Once there, she blended into the morning pedestrian traffic, just another person walking to work in downtown San Francisco. 3 blocks away, she found a payphone and made a call to the one person she trusted completely, Captain Reynolds. Sarah, where the hell are you? The FBI is saying you've gone rogue, that you were working with the bank robbers all along. Captain, that's not true, and you know it. But I need you to listen very carefully. Vincent Murphy is innocent. He was being used by federal agents to set me up. His daughter Emma is probably being held somewhere as leverage. I need you to contact the Phoenix District Attorney and demand protective custody for both of them. Sarah, what are you talking about? I'm talking about federal agents who decided I was more of a threat to their careers than Derek Lawton was to public safety. Captain, everything about this operation was designed to frame me and discredit local law enforcement. There was a long pause. What do you need me to do? Give me 24 hours. Don't report this conversation. Don't tell anyone where I might be. Just give me 1 day to prove what really happened. Sarah, you're asking me to obstruct a federal investigation. I'm asking you to trust me the way you trusted me at that bank 3 weeks ago. Another pause. 24 hours, Mitchell. But if you're wrong about this, we're both going to prison. Sarah hung up the phone and began walking south toward the airport. She had a story to tell, and she knew exactly who needed to hear it. The media attention she'd been avoiding for weeks was about to become her most valuable asset. 2 hours later, she was sitting in a television studio in Los Angeles, telling her story to a national audience. The interview went viral within minutes, shared across social media platforms, and picked up by news outlets around the world. By evening, Vincent Murphy and his daughter Emma were in protective custody. Federal investigators were reviewing the task force operation, and Derek Lawton, whose real name turned out to be Agent David Lawrence from the FBI's Internal Affairs Division, was facing charges for conspiracy and abuse of federal authority. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell was back at her desk in the Phoenix Police Department, working a case involving stolen bicycles and a persistent insurance fraud scheme. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work, the kind that helped real people solve real problems. Her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Detective Mitchell, this is Emma Murphy. My daddy wanted me to call and say thank you for keeping your promise. Sarah smiled, looking out her office window at the desert mountains in the distance. Tell your daddy that good people should always keep their promises, Emma. And that sometimes, the best way to be a hero is just to do your job the right way. I will, Detective Mitchell. And, Detective? My daddy says you're the bravest person he ever met. After she hung up, Sarah returned to her case files, content in the knowledge that heroism wasn't about headlines or recognition. It was about seeing a problem, having the courage to act, and never forgetting that behind every case were real people, whose lives could be changed by someone willing to do the right thing. Outside her window, Phoenix stretched toward the horizon, full of stories waiting to be solved by someone who understood that sometimes the most important victories happened when no one was watching. Halasity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.